Hi today and welcome to the year 10 of the new history. Why is it the year 10? You will see in the next part of this video. Stay with me till the end of this video and you will find out why. Year 10 of the new history. Why is it year 10 and why is it new history? In order to that, let's look into the past. Let's look into the history. Before Jesus Christ, there was many different calendars in the world. People were measuring time for thousands of years already. And one of the calendars, for example, in the Judaic tradition, in the Palestine and the areas of today's Israel, was Anno Mundi, and they measured the time from the beginning of the world as it was described in the Genesis in the Bible. So following this calendar, we would have the year 5777 today, from the beginning of the time, so to say, from the beginning of the world as described in the story of the creation in the Bible. But then Jesus Christ was born and people in the Christian tradition started to measure time in the years before he was born and after he was born. So before Christ and after Christ. So we would have, or we have, the year 2019 of that calendar. And this calendar spread around the world and it is universally used today. But there may be a new calendar that just has started and that many people are not aware of, which marks the beginning of the real history. Why real history? You have to realize that the history taught in different countries is different. It's not only about the facts in these countries, but also about the universal world history. Different countries, different governments teach different versions of history, and they are often really contradictory. Why is it like that? Because it is in interest of the government, of the ruler, to teach history, to tell or to provide to his people this version of history that is favorable for him. And this is in every country. It was in the past when the kings and the Caesars were ruling the world, and it is today when the governments, the democratic governments, are ruling the countries. Always the rulers, the governments, they want the history to be in their favor. Usually it is the newest history because it somehow impacts them directly, and the earlier history doesn't impact them that much. But there are some inconvenient facts in the history that they may delete from the history, maybe change some facts, maybe add some facts in order to make a more sensible narrative out of that. And that has been done for ages, for many, many years. And not only that the current government changes the newest history, but the next governments, the next rulers, they change the history again and again and again. So each generation has actually its own version of history. And if you look at the propaganda, at the news in your country, in maybe Western countries, in the Eastern countries, from different sources, and you realize how skewed these news or this interpretation of the history of the newest events is already, then imagine how skewed, how falsified the history is. So the history we know today, you know different history, you are in a different country, you know a different history than I know, and you are convinced of the truth of that history you know, and I'm convinced of the truth of the history I know, but they are contradictory. So when you realize that, you realize the history we know doesn't have really much in common with the real events that happened in the past. The histories we know that are contradictory, they are a huge falsification, a huge retortion of the events that took place in the past. So this is not a real history, and the events of the past are somehow attached to the calendar. And now, in order to say real history, we have the beginning of the real history. What does it mean? In order to understand that, you need to realize how was the history written in the past. Let's say the Bible. Let's start with the Bible. The history in the Bible or in the New Testament was written 100 years, 150 years after Jesus Christ's death. So it was the story told over and over again and passed to next generations, and then finally it was written down. So on the way there, the story was distorted already. And the moment it was written down, it was somehow, I wouldn't say false, but it was changed or adapted many times already. So there was no possibility of somehow verifying this history, of saying, is it true? Did it really happen? When did it happen? And the further in the past we go, the worse it got, right? And in newer times we had stuff like books, we have stuff like newspapers. So if you wanted to prove that, for example, the First World War started in 1914, in that and that day, on that and that day, you took the newspaper that said Prince Ferdinand killed in Sarajevo on that and that day, and this was the the newspaper from that day. It quoted that, so it was somehow of a proof, or more sure proof of the veracity of that event. But today, I mean, I can take a Photoshop, I can Photoshop the dates and so on, and I could prove with the same method that it started in 1916, or after somebody else did something else, whatever, right? So I could change the dates, I could change the order of the events and so on. So you can't really say what is true and what is not, right? Even if you get the physical paper of that newspaper, you don't know if it is not falsified, right? So there hasn't been any way actually to verify the veracity of any historic event until now. What we were using, or what scientists and historians were using, were just different sources. If different sources told the same stuff, then it was true. This would be the same nowadays. You would say, okay, on every TV in the Western countries is told the same story, then it should be true. And we know that in many cases it isn't, right? Because there were events that weren't true, but they were told all over the place as truth. It turned out later they weren't true. But there is one tool that has been created exactly 10 years ago, on 3rd of January 2009, and we have 10th anniversary of the birth of Bitcoin. The first Bitcoin block was mined on 3rd January 2019. What does it have to do with history? Well, nowadays, let's say today you watch this video, it is published today, the people who watch it, the 1,000 people, they agree this has taken place, and so on and so on. They can put that information in the blockchain. Technically, you could take a hash of that video, put that in the blockchain, and then it would be a proof that this video existed in this exact form on that day. And then nobody will be able to change it ever. this information. You will always be able to prove that this video was in existence on that day, in that exact form. Nobody can change that information. Nobody has found a way to change an information in Bitcoin blockchain. There are many blockchains, but the Bitcoin blockchain has the highest hash rate behind it, and you would need a computing power more than 1,000 times higher than the computing power of Google in order to be able to change just the recent blocks in Bitcoin blockchain, not to say about something that is 2, 3, 5 years ago. And nobody has that power today. And the computing power of blockchain is growing and growing and growing. And in the foreseeable future, nobody will be able to change, to alter anything in the Bitcoin blockchain. That means that the events that are written down in Bitcoin's blockchain, they are unchangeable and they can be the beginning of the new history, of the real history. And since Bitcoin is in existence for 10 years already, it may happen in future generations that they will switch to the Bitcoin blockchain as the holder of the history, of the events, of the historic events. Of course, you don't need to hold the full text of an event. It's enough to hold the hash of that, the checksum of that in the blockchain, in order to make sure that it won't be falsified. And these future generations may ultimately switch to the beginning of Bitcoin blockchain as the beginning of the new history and count years starting from that event, because it will be so important for them to finally be able to have a real, unaltered, unchanged, unfalsified history. So, welcome today in the 10th year of the real history, in the 10th year of Bitcoin blockchain. I hope you like this video. Give me a thumb up. Subscribe below if you haven't yet, in order not to miss my other videos. I invite you to comment. What do you think about that? What is your perspective? What other calendars do you know? Share this video with your friends, with your loved ones. One day they will thank you for that. I talk here a lot about Bitcoin, about cryptocurrencies, about economy, about money. I talk about the billionaires and how they think about the best entrepreneurs in the world, the most successful entrepreneurs, how they think and act. I talk a lot about how to do impossible things in life and business, how to do great things. So if you like this video, you will certainly like my other videos. I invite you to watch them. I wish you a fantastic day today. Let's do something extraordinary today.